Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the opportunity to present the latest work that I've created over essentially the past year.
Okay, well, we'll go home with those considerations of transcendence and transfiguration on our mind. And maybe, JJ, you could come back in a year's time and fill us in on the next episode of trying to make your body obsolete.
Yeah.
So planned obsolescence.
We'll do a time lapse. So.
Thank you very much, JJ.
3.5. One good point to 2009 is the fulcrum of my current professional incarnation, as it was the year that I decided to turn a laundry room into a home laboratory and began referring to myself as a biohacker. I began pursuing an intentionally subversively chimeric experimental practice, initially based upon the appropriation of laboratory techniques or data into the production of artwork. Born of the Stars, a selenium-toned calotype, is an example of this early body work. Through superimposition of images taken at varied orders of magnitude, making use of both photomicroscopy and astrophotography, my aim was to disrupt preconceived notions of scale. Born of the Stars represents an evolutionary metamorphosis of the cosmos into myriad biological forms. This material connection between our bodies and celestial bodies has been a recurring theme throughout my work. As a meteor passes through the upper atmosphere, it produces an ionization trail that reflects radio waves. This reflection can be detected using a standard FM radio receiver with the aid of an antenna. By capturing the trace of meteors falling toward the Earth, the interactive sculpture Echoes of Khoj reminds us of our celestial origins and the mutability of life on our natal planet. At its core, Echoes of Khoj is a reminder of our material connection to the broader universe, of our celestial origins, and the possibility of life originating elsewhere. Moreover, it's an oral reminder of the permeability and mutability of our natal planet, as it bathes in a continuous shower of extraterrestrial matter.
That and some of his
in an attempt to directly reference the evolutionary connection spanning 4 billion years from celestial organic material into Homo sapiens, I developed a modified printing process that allowed me to produce photographic prints using my own blood. Based upon the 19th century albumin printing process that normally utilizes egg whites to create the emulsion, I've instead chosen to substitute the serum from my freshly drawn whole blood. This series of human blood-derived albumin prints are called primitiae, alluding to their subject. I've inserted my biological material, a set of specific DNA sequences, into the digital image file, and take the original digital file that was taken through a microscope into the interior crystalline structure of the meteorite, thereby altering or glitching its form. Therefore, primitiae contain both the rudimentary composite material and the evolutionary fruits of extraterrestrial objects. Drawing upon Otto Steinert's concept of subjective photography and his drive to move photography beyond straightforward representation, I've begun my own experimentations not only with the medium through which the image is produced, but exploring the reflexivity within the subject matter itself. Produced through the combination of my blood with various, quote, and I'll add the quotes to that, natural substances, and recorded using only a hacked webcam for a microscope, Corpus Grandiferum considers the body as terrain for exploration and exploitation. Through extrapolation, it can be seen as both a satellite or God's eye view of our planet, as well as a metaphor for our material relationship with the Earth. The imagery is produced as my blood either mixes or resists the addition of exogenous natural material, such as metals, pigments, and resins. A series of moving images capture the ebb and flow of my red blood cells through this surreal landscape, accompanied by the aural compositions they've inspired. In permutation 1, blood cells defy gravity, streaming through flakes of copper oxide upward, reaching toward the heavens. My residency at SymbioticA earlier this year provided me with access to a DIC, or differential interference contrast microscope. Placed under a DSE scope, this chimeric mix of blood and terrestrial matter transformed further into abstract landscapes with unprecedented depth. With a syringe full of my freshly drawn blood in hand, admittedly a common scene in my studio practice, I play with the chemolumigram process, experimenting with the effects I can produce by controlling the flow of blood through the needle and the way in which the blood reacts to the emulsion on an array of photographic papers. Inspired by an exhibition of Cy Twombly paintings I had stumbled upon in Basel, I began to likewise experiment with, quote, excessive coloration and gesture, quote from the exhibition catalog. I was particularly drawn to the way in which his work elicits a sense of carelessness or defilement. It was Twombly's untitled 1961 Roma and a coincidental residency that led me to Rome that provoked this response to his work as a series of experiments that bring post-abstract expressionism into photographic printmaking. It may have been my academic training in biomedical research that cultivated in me a tolerance for the unique smells and textures of biomaterials, but it was joining the biohacking movement that afforded me the freedom to question what I had taken for granted and approach the techniques and materials with which I'd grown so familiar with fresh eyes and open mind. Initially conceived as a method of stripping aged or diseased cells from a donor organ in order to, it's quite bright, in order to regenerate it using new cells, my collaborator Amy Congdon and I have appropriated decellularization into a creative practice. Once an organ or tissue is stripped of its cellular material, only the extracellular matrix remains containing the proteins such as collagen or elastin that comprise the architecture of the organ. Within the context of biomedical research, the D-cell process prepares a scaffold to reseed with stem cells, the objective being the full regeneration and restoration of the tissue's original function. Our collective work proffers decellularization or decellularized flesh as material in its own right, to be experimented with and to push it to its aesthetic limits. For decellular, I designed a set of glass vessels that would allow us to carry out the protocol within a gallery setting. Since the debut of decellular in 2013, I've continued to experiment with decell in my own practice as a process of dematerializing, of devitalizing what was once part of a living being in preparation for its biophysical resurrection. Within a bespoke glass vessel sits a fully preserved decellularized heart. The talitas is the antithesis of the memento mori, representing the obsolescence of my body. The decellularized heart it contains sits in place of my own until the moment of its programmed disembodiment. The sculptural form of the talitas is intended to serve as a vessel to memorialize an organ that was once part of my being and carried me through to the point where it could be rendered superfluous to the extant constituents of my body. Revealing that which is deepest within us, penetralia unpacks the obscured self. The vibrant colors of histological stains illuminate the anatomy of our impulsivity and disgust, as segments of a decelled porcine bowel are laid bare in a manner that is raw and visceral. Stellark, that most brilliant of cyborgs with contagious laugh, once mused that to him, quote, the body is an impersonal, evolutionary, objective structure. Having spent 2,000 years prodding and poking the human psyche without any real discernible changes in our historical and human outlook, perhaps we need to take a more fundamental physiological and structural approach and consider the fact that it's only through radically redesigning the body that we will end up having significantly different thoughts and philosophies. The present trajectory of my own work attends to the body as a contested space, contextualized within a contemporary expanded definition of body boundaries, thus expounding upon the work of other contemporary artists who likewise dissect the complexities of our modern relationship with our own biomaterials. Marking time found roots in the alternate anatomies laboratory at Curtin, owing to the overwhelming generosity of stellar communicellars. The title is intended to reference both the military notion of marking time, to march in the same place yet not move in any one direction, as well as a sense of encapsulating a moment. A series of synthetic meteorites, my talisman and emblem of our extraterrestrial provenance, will contain my biological material carefully preserved and archived. Through marking time, I proffer a material legacy that is interwoven with the natural history and narrative of my body over what remains of my lifetime. Ostensibly secular contemporary ideologies proffer an alternate path to salvation that is entirely self-determined, arguably relativistic, abjures the supernatural, and for most, the salvation, an immortal state free of suffering, can be attained through biotechnological conversion to a post-human state, or at least sustaining one's corporeal being through constant regeneration. Bennu, the recent work, is ash made of my blood, and it awaits material resurrection. It marks the beginning of a planned obsolescence of my own body and its rebirth into new incarnations. Sorry, I'm reading a pinwheel. To frame the direction of my work, a ceaseless revision of my material being towards multiple forms, incarnations, and potentialities, I compose the Manifesto of Transfiguration. It begins with a dismissal of our present fallible biological state, echoing the beginning of Valentine Saint-Font's Manifesto of the Futurist Woman, claiming all humanity is mediocre. At its core, Transfiguration is a call for the individual and all those of like mind to seek apotheosis through the pursuit of techne, in the Platonic sense of the word, virtuous practice or knowing through making. Directing our imagination and creative impulse toward our own corporeal essence by eschewing all that is normal, facile, or ordinary, and bravely pursuing that which is extraordinary and perhaps irrational to the common man. It is possible to experience a more profound, expanded connection with and through our bodies, thus enabling us to more fully engage with our natal universe. If you'll indulge me, I'd like to read it for you now and hope that it might encourage provocative discourse. If I can get it to scroll down. Nature, and by extension the human body, is mediocre and deserving of scorn. It is not the product of supernatural design, but rather probability, and therefore merits no intrinsic reverence or devotion. The schism between, quote, natural and, quote, synthetic is artifice. Whether made by the hands of humankind or other beings, forces, all matter is formed by the same fragmentary constituents of our cosmos. As a species, humans have developed an impulse to find meaning out of seeming disorder, and from this impulse is born our search for purpose and the transcendental. Such an impulse can be as destructive as much as it is powerful, yet it must be cultivated in the search for our own apotheosis. It is only through the advancement of techne that apotheosis can be attained. For what is technology but an attempt to ameliorate insufficiency? The quest for apotheosis merits abhorrence for the ordinary and an aversion to convention. Rather, our deliverance lies in the singular, the aberration, the impossible. Uniformity breeds mundanity, the perdition from which we seek salvation. Transcendence must be sought in every aspect of our existence, the material, the spiritual, the cerebral, the emotional, and that which is revered as sacred, sublime, and worthy of our devotion must abjure a sense of familiarity. Ours is an aesthetic devoted to the exceptional, the irrational, the preposterous.
Okay, thank you, Jaden. Fantastic. So the manifesto, tell us a little bit more about its origins, and because that's something you developed some time ago.
Yeah.
Has it kind of refine? Do you revisit it? How does the relationship between the manifesto and the work and the practices?
So I think forming the manifesto back when, during that period of intensive research academically in the MA, helped me begin to create the framework through which my current and future practice would manifest itself. It was really interesting to go back to that original manifesto and reflect upon the course of the past year and a half and how that philosophical base has informed the experimentation that I've pursued. Yeah.
And working processes, obviously a huge journey between kind of intuitive mark making, exploring different materials, significant laboratory processes which take an incredible amount of rigour to understand and manifest.
To hack.
And to hack. How do you navigate that space between different methods and practices? Tell us a little bit more about that.
So, in terms of inspiration, sometimes it begins like with Pernichier and with Echoes of the Push. It begins with the idea, the concept. I want to find the best way to encapsulate the concept behind it. But much of the time, it's simply how can I re-envision, how can I reinterpret an existing protocol in a new way that might reveal a bit about what the action of the person doing it. So it becomes an excessively reflexive experience. So therefore, it's recursive. I take someone else's protocol, I hack it, incorporate my own techniques, my own concepts behind it, and then reflect upon the doing.
And it's a hugely philosophical endeavour as well. What's the question to do with that? Anyone got a question on philosophical endeavour? Anyone got a question? Lots of people. Okay, I'm going to pass over.
JJ, thank you for your talk. I'm a great fan of your work, so I'm delighted to be here. And what suddenly occurred to me, seeing the bowl of ash that you showed us just now, was that there is a relationship that people have with the matter in their body that is sort of goes through death. And so one talks about, ashes to ashes. You can imagine yourself as being whatever molecules you are or atoms you are before you're born, and then somehow they become food, and then you become ingested by your mother, and you become what you are, and then you eat, and you continue, and that's sort of your relationship with matter. And then finally you die, and then you become ash, or you go into the ground, or you get put in a cremation, so whatever it is. But there's something that you're doing that is subverting that very traditional course. And I was wondering whether that's something, how do you think about that in terms of, if you just take somebody that's a normal person, has this traditional relationship with the matter in their body, and you're doing something very different. And how do they relate to each other or not relate to each other? And what are you trying, if you're trying to investigate or break or subvert? What is it something that is part of your practice, that element of it?
I mean, perhaps because I am dealing with notions of salvation, immortality, there is that search for transcendence. So maybe trying to stage my death in advance, if I could see it as such. But I think for me the broader scope is developing an intimacy inside and out with my own body. And becoming comfortable with my body in perhaps a way that most people are not. Yeah, but this is a good point. Honestly, when I'm working, I don't really think about what other people are thinking about what I'm doing. For me, it's an action for myself. So I am interested in these public forums to hear a response to what I'm doing to my body, and perhaps how it could be viewed by others.
I think that came across when you're talking about that reflexive process between you and the processes that you're undertaking in materials and those philosophical considerations that are imbued within that. So this is the opportunity to get other responses, to step out of that self-reflective question.
Thank you very much for your talk. It's very, very interesting indeed. This word hacking we've heard many times this evening already implies a sort of processual engagement with the objects we're engaging with. And as we've already discussed here, the corporeality is the thing that inspires such a process. I'm interested when you are talking about the fragments. The corporeality is a different sort of fragments in some ways, because we're thinking in physical sense, in the kind of biomedical sense, of a sort of Deleuzian input-output schema. We have a sort of flow of these things, so the blood comes out, and there's a process that happens to it. Assuming your techne is a sort of Heideggerian techne of process as well, does that perhaps question, or maybe another way to put it, how does that place your questioning of external bodies, of, for example, celestial bodies, in the process, and how does that maybe question those two works within your practice?
Well, I think the external body is another side topic that I explore quite a bit in my work, the sort of medicalized body of the biological, biotechnological era. When I was in India, I had a rather fascinating discussion that occurred over a period of time with my colleagues that practice Vipassana yoga. For those that aren't familiar, it's a rather intensive practice where you become intensely aware of your body and ideally forming some sort of control of it. But it's an entirely subjective understanding and relationship with the physical state of your body. As opposed to what I'm most familiar with, especially in allopathic medicine, an externalized understanding of the body, where physicians, the medical staff, biomedical researchers have a better understanding of my own body than I do. So this was a rather fascinating juxtaposition that I'd like to explore further, but I find this, I'll think about it further relating to extraterrestrial objects and that connection. I find it more as a way to show the link, that deep time link between the celestial objects and my body specifically, but our bodies collectively. I'll think about it further in terms of external, internal, in-out relationships. But I do find you brought up the external body, and that triggered another sort of side discourse to my work.
Thanks very much. Jonathan Jewell, I was saying that I was on the art theory and philosophy course. By only 2 weeks in, I didn't actually understand most of the deep details. It's going to be interesting. I won't say it. I just actually was interested. You started off in biomedicine, bioinformatics and stuff.
I have 2 advanced degrees in biology and bioinformatics.
Okay. Well, what I was interested in, a very simple question, it's a bit personal, is when did you first look down the microscope or see some blood, or maybe it was as a kid, there's maybe a patch of blood. When did you look at that and thought, wow, there's art in this? I was wondering how that sort of light influenced you coming on this program.
As to how it influenced me to join the art and science, or?
Well, I guess how you've ultimately ended up here, but I guess from my point of view, I mean, it's a bit existential, isn't it? No, I meant how you ultimately ended up on the programme and beyond the programme, because I was thinking, or like when you saw the art in science.
Yeah. When did I see the art in science?
Yeah. At what point did you sort of like look down there and say, you know what?
You know, honestly, I never really saw a schism between art and science. My understanding of what art is has definitely evolved as I become a professional artist. And certainly as I unlace the corset that biomedical research has put upon me as a scientist. This is not against me. So loosening my understanding of science as a practice of experimentation rather than a didactic ingraining of knowledge. So when did I first see the art in my practice? Honestly, that's an evolving thing. In fact, I often question in my own practice, how much this is art. But truthfully, I've always just had this curiosity that I've had to find, both through art and science, starting with music, into sciences, and back out into visual arts. So for me, it's always been intertwined. personal.
Are those modes, I assume that sometimes they are in conflict?
Absolutely, yeah. Because we're talking
How
about
do
two
you deal
different
with
value
that?
systems, right? You have two completely different value systems, and so oftentimes I find myself framing the way I describe my work depending on who I'm speaking to. Because you have to speak in terms of the values of science, which is a shared experience, shared understanding of truth, versus art, which is a very subjective, very personal, sometimes visceral experience that can be shared. So I often have to frame it in my boxes of art and science. Yeah.
And within your own reflexive process,
Yeah.
how do you deal with those conflicts? Not the externalizing,
Yeah.
presenting.
Yeah. I honestly try and find a way to mix them as best I can. So I'm not necessarily approaching, like for example, this project, The Matter of Humanness, started as a scientific investigation. It was a bioinformatic project that I found rather fascinating on a philosophical level. So that evolved into the production of artwork. So I guess sometimes it starts with a scientific idea, development sometimes, protocol, that I latch onto and try and push into some sort of project that can capture it with a completely different context.
We've probably got time for one or two more.
Well, I was actually going to ask you originally to whether you could explain this last slide. And one of the things which occurs to me is something to do with this funny lapse between art and science, and whether the fact that it resembles a whole area of modernist artwork justifies the science, or whether the science justifies the art. I actually wonder what the conversation between the two is, because we're looking at something which immediately looks very familiar. Like you're talking about cytomry, and you think, oh, this is familiar, and then you see it's blood or whatever. You say, oh, it's unfamiliar. I think that kind of funny lacuna is something which I think perhaps would be good to hear about.
Yeah, perhaps using a touchstone that's familiar in one that moves into a different context. So this project, I think you're probably referring to Richter, right? This does look very familiar to those in the art world, but in fact it's scientific data that I've developed a visual heuristic for visualizing protein structure. So in these images are actually 3 of the proteins that I study. And these proteins happen to be 3 proteins that distinguish us, materially speaking, from every other terrestrial being. They're uniquely human proteins. So as to, I'm interested to hear your response from what I've just heard about this.
Well, I think the interesting thing there is that somehow the integrity of the object, is that then a corroboration of the integrity of the structures you're discussing? It actually goes straight to the heart of what you're talking about. Is the poetics of the whole process, which I think I find very quite moving, really.
Well, I'd be interested to hear how you're defining integrity. Integrity and
okay, I think in the history of art, one of the things which is very defining is this aspiration towards integrity. The integrity of the art object, meaning that it doesn't refer to anything else outside of it. And then suddenly what you've done is you've turned it on its head, and you've used somehow the idea of the art object, which is abstract, it doesn't have to refer to anything else outside of it. Suddenly it's a reference, it becomes a code again. which I think is, what it does is it points out the fallacy of the idea of the artwork which has integrity, because obviously in order to read any artwork you have to bring your baggage to it. And so you know that the art object which has integrity automatically is begs more questions than it answers. And so that idea that hey, yes, it's also a code, by decoding it, you have this funny dilemma that you're no longer living in the artwork. So it's a problematic, what perhaps
How much you reveal of the origins of the concept of the idea.
Yeah. Anyway, right.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Thank you for the wonderful talk. I'm curious to hear what you have to say about transcendence. because in my mind it's a very, let's say, broad concept, in that there are lots of views on it. And I was particularly curious in hearing what you have to say about transcendence and the materiality that is ingrained in your work, and the materiality carrying material matter, becoming, let's say, immortal.
No, I think you're touching on something that, it's perhaps, I don't know, paradoxical. Right? Transcendence is meant to be something that is material turned immaterial. Yeah. So yes, in a way, it's not becoming metaphysical, at least materially speaking. But instead, I think my objects are meant to transcend my own body. So transcending one object into another. So rather than perhaps a traditional theological understanding of transcendence, this is more material transcendence. That perhaps one could argue that's transfiguration, but that's an ontological question that needs to be parsed.
Thank you. Anyone have a final burning question or comment? Okay, well, we'll go home with those considerations of transcendence and transfiguration on our mind. And maybe, JJ, you could come back in a year's time and fill us in on the next episode of trying to make your body obsolete.
We'll do a time lapse. So.
Thank you very much, JJ.